Welcome. If you could give us your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon, or almost evening. My name is Dr. Aaron Adams. I'm the director of a science-based nonprofit organization called Bonefish Tarpon Trust. I'm also a research associate professor at Florida Tech. My office is at the Vero Beach Marine Lab on the beach side. And today I'm speaking on behalf of Bonefish Tarpon Trust. BTT is a science-based conservation organization that works towards the conservation of recreational fisheries and coastal habitats throughout the world, pretty much, tropics and subtropics. I bring with me personally about 30 years of work in fish ecology, working with fish and habitats throughout the Western Hemisphere. So my comments are a bit different than others that you've heard today in that they pertain to the Oslo project and location, but they're based upon my experience in dozens of locations that I've studied throughout, again, the Western Hemisphere, Gulf of Mexico, Southeast U.S., etc. I think it's important to note that, there's a lot of talk about money here. The recreational fishery in the state of Florida has an annual economic impact around $8 billion a year. It's a big number, and it rivals many sectors of the agricultural and other portions of the economy in Florida, but it doesn't get the play that it deserves. And the reason that's important is because that fishery, worth $8 billion a year, depends on healthy habitats. Unfortunately, Indian River Lagoon, and you're not alone, many other places in the world don't have much in the way of healthy habitats. So any habitats that are left have to be taken with special regard. Indian River Lagoon has already lost much of its mangrove habitats through history. If you look at aerial photos, for example, from the 1950s, the amount of mangrove coverage along the shorelines of Indian River Lagoon was many orders of magnitude higher than it is now. Now, compared to other places, and you can go in the same state, Charlotte Harbor is a good example, the amount of mangroves remaining in Indian River Lagoon doesn't amount to much ecologically. So the lagoon's already at a deficit. That means that seagrass in the lagoon is even more important than in estuaries that are functioning at full capacity, such as Charlotte Harbor. With the seagrass die-off of 2010, the Indian River Lagoon lost that capacity and lost its ability to respond to other ills, whether it's runoff, sedimentation, pollution, prop scarring, those types of things. That makes a place like the Oslo location even more important. And one of the frustrations I had earlier this morning when the county staff was discussing the site is they kept talking about the impacts of the site, the dredging location. You can't look at it that way. It's cumulative. For example, if you go to up in the panhandle of Florida, some of the largest expanse of seagrass in this region, in this hemisphere, continuous expanse of seagrass, in this hemisphere, if you took away a half acre of seagrass, it probably wouldn't have much of a large-scale ecological impact. However, in the Indian River Lagoon, where you literally have no seagrass left, compared to past years where healthy estuaries, every piece matters. And it's very frustrating. Again, this is my experience, not just based here or in Florida, but around the hemisphere. People are addressing similar problems to what you're talking about today. They're making the wrong decisions, and they're regretting it years down the road because they don't have the fisheries remaining. Grant Gilmore has the experience at this location. Other speakers have a scientific background as well. I think it's important that you realize that you have at your capacity, at your will, beck and call to some extent as far as getting information, some of the top scientists in the world when it comes to estuary ecology. And the way that we do our science is we don't go out and do research to find a conclusion that we're searching for. If we knew the answer, we wouldn't do the research. We do the research to try and understand the system, and the data leads us in a certain direction. As a friend of mine says, it is what it is. We don't interpret it, this is what it is. So all the comments that you've heard from the scientists today, including myself, it's not an interpretation of data, it's not extrapolation, that's what it is. And so when you think about the Oslo project, you can't just think about the location. You have to think about how it fits into the overall context, historical, spatial, both time and space. And Indian River Lagoon, if you've lived here long enough, and it doesn't take long with the seagrass die-off, ecologically speaking, it's not a healthy system. And just like a patient in a hospital, you need to do everything you can to restore the health before you start to affect other components. I think that, and I know that the county has one, but I think it's worth rethinking or revisiting the overall county conservation plan, restoration plans, because if that was comprehensive enough, an issue like this wouldn't even come for consideration because it had been taken off the table because of its obvious ecological importance. More specifically to the Oslo boat ramp, and as Grant said this morning, well, it seems like about a week ago, I specialize a lot of different fish, but juvenile snook and tarpon especially. In Charlotte Harbor Lagoon, or Charlotte Harbor Estuary on the west coast of Florida, I'll be working there for 12 years, also throughout the Caribbean and in the Indian River Lagoon. And places like Oslo provide what we call the habitat mosaic. It's not just the grass. It's the grass adjacent to the mangroves. And not just the mangroves, but the mangroves which, what are now those ditches, used to be what we call ephemeral ponds that were there seasonally. Those are the locations that juvenile snook and tarpon require. Not kind of need, require. If those types of backwater, stinky, mucky habitats, shallow habitats disappear, so will the tarpon and snook. That is a fact based on science. But that's not enough. You need adjacent to those backwater habitats the things like the mangrove fringe and the shallow seagrass, because that's the transition habitat. As you saw the pictures of juvenile tarpon and snook this big back in those mucky ditches, as they grow, they move out and they use a wider array of habitats. If those habitats at the Oslo location are compromised, all those fish that use that and are able to survive will also be compromised. That will have impacts on the recreational fisheries in this estuary. The recreational fishery in the estuary has already suffered because of the loss of seagrass. To compound that by our own actions, direct actions, I think would be quite a shame. Going back again to the larger context, and there's a lot of talk about the Oslo ramp and the history of Indian River Lagoon, which is very important. But I think for your sake as decision makers, you have to think outside, think larger. Realize that other places have actually gone through what the exact type of decisions that you're going through right now. Chesapeake Bay is an example. Tampa Bay is another example. The list goes on. So it's not like you're making this decision in a vacuum. Myself and others who are here have been part of those processes and decisions. So we can bring that type of information to you. And just as you guys are busy, I'm busy, everyone else is busy. Sitting here since 9 o'clock this morning, I could think of a lot of things I'm behind on now because of that. But I'm here because it's important, both as a person who works and lives in this lagoon, but also as a scientist who's experienced this from the Chesapeake Bay all the way south to Belize. It's the same type of thing. So I urge you to think larger. If you haven't taken a drive over to Charlotte Harbor, it's only about 3 hours. I urge you to do so. You'll see what Indian River Lagoon used to look like 50, 60 years ago. You don't need to know someone who was here or have been there yourself. That type of thing is still existing in Charlotte Harbor. And in all honesty, if you want to make that trip, I can set it up for you, set up boats, and you can actually go and see what that type of estuary looks like, what this is supposed to look like. And then Oslo is a small piece of that. I think that's very important. Finally, I'd like to speak to the discussion on mitigation. And I understand how mitigation is being used. I would say as far as it goes towards the importance of this area's fish habitat, the mitigation that's being used or proposed means absolutely nothing. It's fool's gold. Taking away invasive plants on an artificial island because you're removing underwater fish habitat and affecting the quality of that habitat to the fish, that's apples and oranges. If you're really going to use mitigation to address what you think is something that is necessary, with which I disagree, think about a place somewhere else. Put that type of money into seagrass transplanting, mangrove transplanting, something that actually matters to the estuary, not something that invasive plants are bad, but nothing compared to this loss of underwater habitat. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.